Ma'am, get on the ground right now or I'll make you get on the ground.
For what? I've committed no crime. I'm asking for your badge number.
Last warning, stop resisting my commands.
You don't get to invent resistance.
Kaiser, steady.
Surrender my rights.
Oh my God.
You released your dog on me in a parking lot.
At exactly 8:13 p.m. on a humid Thursday evening in the parking lot of the Cedar Glen Commons shopping center, what should have been an ordinary trip to pick up dry cleaning and a prescription turned into one of the most explosive police misconduct cases that fictional state had ever seen. Within days, body camera footage from that night would spread across the internet like wildfire, racking up millions of views, igniting protests, triggering internal investigations, and forcing city officials into frantic damage control. But this was not just another viral confrontation video. This was different. This involved a 55-year-old black female military officer, a woman with decades of service, discipline, and leadership behind her, being treated like a violent criminal in front of shocked bystanders while a police dog was unleashed on her in a crowded parking lot. What happened next would shatter a police department's public image, cost the city millions of dollars, and remind the entire country of a truth too many people prefer to ignore. Authority without accountability becomes danger. Before I continue, take a second and think about this. Imagine serving your country for decades, leading troops, protecting lives, following rules your entire career, and then being humiliated, attacked, and nearly killed over nothing more than someone in uniform deciding you looked like a threat. That is the heart of this story. And if you've ever seen power abused in plain sight, you already know why this one hit people so hard. The woman at the center of it all was Lieutenant Colonel Denise Holloway. At 55 years old, Denise was not someone easily intimidated, and she was definitely not someone unfamiliar with pressure. She had spent 31 years in the military, beginning as an enlisted communications specialist before earning her commission and eventually rising through the ranks. She had served in 2 overseas deployments, earned multiple commendations for leadership under stress, and built a reputation as the kind of officer younger service members sought out when they needed clarity, fairness, or courage. People who knew her described her as composed, precise, deeply principled, and impossible to bully. She taught logistics and command ethics later in her career, and she believed in rules not because they were convenient, but because they protected people from chaos. Denise understood procedure. She understood use of force. She understood command presence. And most importantly, she understood when someone wearing a badge was stepping far outside the limits of lawful authority. On that evening, Denise had not been doing anything unusual. She had finished a long day at the Regional Veterans Resource Center, where she volunteered twice a week helping recently discharged service members navigate benefits, housing support, and medical paperwork. After that, she stopped at Cedar Glen Commons to pick up her blood pressure medication and a uniform jacket she was having altered for an upcoming military retirement banquet. The sun had already disappeared, leaving behind a streak of purple and orange in the sky. Storefront lights reflected across the rows of parked cars. Shopping carts rattled in the distance. Music from a nearby restaurant drifted over the asphalt. It was the kind of peaceful suburban scene people associate with safety. Denise was tired but relaxed. She had one small pharmacy bag in her hand, her phone in her purse, and every intention of being home within 20 minutes. She was not loitering. She was not arguing with anyone. She was not trespassing. She was not drinking. She was not disturbing the peace. She was simply unlocking her SUV and placing a garment bag in the back seat. That was it. That was the entire scene before Officer Daniel Mercer decided to intervene. The first trigger was a call from a store employee who reported a suspicious person walking between vehicles and looking into cars. That employee would later admit during the investigation that he had only seen Denise pause briefly near another SUV because she thought it might be hers. Same model, same color, same general spot. A harmless mistake anyone could make in a large parking lot at night. But by the time the call reached patrol units, the language had changed. Suspicious person became possible vehicle prowler. Possible vehicle prowler became potential theft in progress. And when Officer Mercer rolled into the lot with his K9 in the back of his cruiser, his mindset was already set. He wasn't arriving to ask questions. He was arriving to dominate the scene. Officer Daniel Mercer had been with the department for just under 9 years. He was known by some co-workers as aggressive, efficient, and proactive. By others, he was known as arrogant, easily offended, and far too comfortable escalating ordinary encounters. He had built his reputation around command presence, though in practice that often meant barking orders, interrupting civilians, and treating hesitation as defiance. He had been praised by supervisors for high arrest numbers and strong field control, but there had also been quiet complaints, too many rough stops, too many hostile reports from residents, Too many stories that seemed to begin with Mercer deciding someone was disrespectful and end with force that somehow became justified on paper. Nothing had stuck. Nothing had been serious enough, at least officially, to slow his rise. And that night, with Rex pacing in the rear cage of the cruiser, Mercer stepped out ready to make another show of control. He approached Denise from behind and shouted, "Step away from the vehicle! Hands where I can see them!" Denise turned immediately, startled but composed. She raised her empty hand and said, "Officer, I'm getting into my own car." Mercer did not ask her name. He did not ask for identification. He did not ask whether she owned the vehicle. He closed the distance and said, "You match the description of a suspect breaking into cars." Denise, still calm, answered, "Then verify that before you accuse me of a crime." It was a reasonable statement. A measured statement. A statement many people would expect to lead to questions, clarification, maybe even a brief apology. But for Mercer, being questioned by a calm black woman in public registered not as information, but as resistance. This is the part where everything started going wrong. Instead of investigating, Mercer began issuing increasingly aggressive commands. "Drop your keys. Step back. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Denise asked the obvious question. "Am I under arrest?" Mercer did not answer directly. "You are being detained." Denise then asked the second obvious question. "For what specific crime?" Again, Mercer dodged. "I'm not debating with you." That sentence would become one of the most discussed lines in the footage because it captured the real issue perfectly. Mercer did not want compliance through lawful explanation. He wanted submission without question. As the body camera footage later showed, Denise never advanced toward Mercer. She never threatened him. She never cursed. She never made a sudden movement. She kept saying the same thing in different forms. "Tell me why I'm being detained. I'm not resisting. I'm not a threat. You do not need to touch me." Every sentence was clear, controlled, and legally significant. You can even hear the shift in Mercer's breathing as his frustration starts to rise. He was losing the psychological advantage he was used to. This wasn't someone crying, begging, apologizing, or instantly obeying confusing commands out of fear. Denise was centered, disciplined, precise. She spoke to him the way a superior officer might speak to a junior leader who was unraveling under pressure. Then came the first turning point. Mercer reached for Denise's wrist, apparently intending to spin her around and force handcuffs on her. Denise instinctively pulled her arm back and said, "Do not put your hands on me without cause." It lasted less than a second, but that tiny moment, common in chaotic encounters, was all Mercer needed to pretend the situation had become dangerous. He took 2 steps back, raised his voice, and shouted, "Now you're resisting. Get on the ground." Several shoppers in the background could be heard stopping and asking what was happening. One woman said, "She's not doing anything." Another voice said, "Why are you yelling at her?" Public scrutiny had entered the scene, and Mercer hated that. Denise looked around briefly, then back at Mercer. "Officer, I am a retired lieutenant colonel. I am not resisting. I am asking you to conduct yourself professionally." That line hit him like a slap. In the footage, you can actually see the change in his face. Not fear, not caution, something uglier. Contempt mixed with wounded ego. He took a step closer and said, "I don't care who you are. On the ground now." Denise answered, "And I don't care that you have a badge if you're using it unlawfully." It was a devastating response because it stripped away the aura he was relying on. He could not win the exchange with facts. He could not win it with calm, so he prepared to win it with force. Quickly, Mercer opened the rear door of his cruiser and pulled Rex out on leash. That decision alone would later become a major issue in the investigation. Department policy required a clear, articulable threat before deploying a K-9 in a non-felony public contact setting, especially in a crowded civilian area. There was no such threat here. Denise was standing beside her own vehicle in sandals and slacks, holding nothing but keys and a pharmacy bag. Yet Mercer brought out the dog anyway, using fear as leverage. Rex barked wildly, lunging against the line. Several bystanders backed away. Denise, still standing upright, said something that would later define the whole encounter. "So this is what you do when you can't justify your order? You terrorize people?" Another officer arrived, Officer Leah Moreno, and for one brief moment, it looked like the situation might calm down. Moreno approached from Mercer's left and asked, "What's the charge?" Mercer answered without taking his eyes off Denise. "Resisting detention, possible auto burglary." Moreno looked at Denise, looked at the clean vehicle, the shopping bags, the garment bag, the pharmacy receipt visible through the plastic, and hesitated. "Did we confirm the car?" she asked. Mercer snapped back, "I said I've got it." That exchange mattered because it showed even another officer on scene immediately saw that basic investigative steps had not been taken. But Mercer was too committed now. He had built an entire confrontation around an assumption, and backing down in public would mean admitting he had caused it. Denise, sensing that another officer had arrived, tried once more to de-escalate. "Officer, she said to Moreno. Please note for your camera that I have asked repeatedly why I am being detained and no one has articulated a lawful basis. That is not how most people speak under stress. That is not panic. That is training. That is someone documenting an abuse of power in real time. And Mercer knew it. He knew every second this continued, the footage was becoming more dangerous for him, so he made the worst decision of his career. He gave an order that would later cost the city millions. Take her down, he shouted, and then, almost instantly, Rex, engage! The dog lunged. The footage is hard to watch even in fictional form. Denise barely had time to turn before Rex slammed into her side and drove her against the rear quarter panel of her SUV. She screamed, not with panic, but with shocked pain, as the dog clamped onto her left forearm and dragged her downward. The pharmacy bag flew across the pavement. Her keys skidded under a car. Mercer rushed forward, yelling conflicting commands while Rex continued biting. Denise fell to one knee, then to the ground, crying out, "Call him off! Call him off!" Shoppers screamed in the background. Someone yelled, "She's an older woman! Get the dog off her!" Another person shouted, "I'm recording this." Officer Moreno's body camera would later capture the most damning reaction of the entire scene. She can be heard yelling directly at Mercer, "She was not charging you! Call your dog off now!" Even another officer on site was horrified. It took several agonizing seconds before Mercer finally pulled Rex away. By then, Denise's sleeve was shredded, blood was visible on the pavement, and she was curled partly on her side, gasping, trying to keep pressure on the wound with her free hand. And still, unbelievably, Mercer moved to handcuff her. That was the moment everything changed. Moreno stepped between them and said, "No, EMS first," Mercer argued. Moreno did not budge. She knelt beside Denise and asked, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Denise, breathing hard but still astonishingly composed, answered, "Yes, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Denise Holloway, retired. I am injured. I want medical treatment and I want a supervisor." Even on the ground, bleeding from a K9 bite, she was still documenting, still organizing, still forcing the system to answer itself. A crowd had gathered by then. Phones were out. People were filming from multiple angles. Mercer's posture began to shift. The certainty was gone. He started pacing and justifying himself aloud, saying things like, "She refused commands," and "She pulled away," and "I feared she might flee." But the words sounded thin, hollow, rehearsed. He wasn't talking to Denise anymore. He was talking to the cameras. He was talking to future investigators. He was talking to the version of the story he hoped he could still salvage. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They cut away Denise's torn sleeve and began treating deep puncture wounds and lacerations to her forearm and shoulder. One of them asked what happened, and Denise answered in a measured voice. "The officer escalated without cause and released a dog on me while I stood by my own vehicle." That statement would later appear almost word for word in legal filings. She was transported to St. Catherine Memorial Hospital. Mercer, meanwhile, remained at the scene trying to frame the incident as a lawful response to active resistance. That might have worked in another era. It might even have worked on another night, but not this time. Too many cameras, too much audio, too many witnesses, and one of those witnesses wore the same uniform he did. Most people, after enduring something like that, would focus only on healing. Denise did heal, but she also went to work. Within 48 hours of being released from the hospital, her attorney received a detailed handwritten timeline she had created from memory. It included the order of events, direct quotes, timestamps based on receipts and phone records, names of witnesses she remembered hearing, and a preliminary list of policy questions that any investigator would need to answer. She requested public records. She preserved her clothing. She documented her injuries daily. She contacted the city, the department's Professional Standards Bureau, the Civilian Oversight Board, and a federal civil rights attorney. Her complaint wasn't emotional chaos. It was disciplined devastation. It read less like a victim statement and more like the opening brief in a major civil rights case. The department received her formal complaint on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Officer Mercer had been placed on administrative leave. That alone told people how serious the evidence already looked. Normally, departments slow-walk these things. First they review, then they request, then they delay. But Denise's case came with body camera footage from 2 officers, half a dozen civilian recordings, medical documentation, witness statements, store surveillance from 3 angles, time-stamped purchase receipts proving why she was there, and a clean service history that made Mercer's early narrative look absurd. There was nowhere for the department to hide. Internal affairs investigators began with the footage. According to later testimony in fictional court proceedings, the lead investigator watched Mercer's body cam diagram twice in silence, then requested every other angle before writing a single note. The evidence confirmed several things immediately. Mercer never identified a specific crime before escalating. He never performed basic verification that the vehicle belonged to Denise, even though it was registered in her name and parked legally. He treated her request for explanation as resistance. He introduced the K9 without a qualifying threat. He released the dog in a public area without sufficient cause, and after the bite, he attempted to continue force instead of prioritizing medical care. But there was something else in the footage that made the case even more explosive. In audio captured moments before the physical confrontation, Mercer can be heard muttering to Moreno, apparently unaware his microphone was still transmitting clearly. "These people always want to argue." He then added a phrase that, once enhanced during the investigation, shattered whatever defense he had left. "She thinks because she's one of the respectable ones I'm supposed to play nice." That line hit like a bomb. It suggested bias, not just aggression, not just bad judgment. Bias, the kind that turns ordinary interactions into dangerous encounters because the officer is not seeing an individual, he is seeing a stereotype. Once that audio surfaced, the case went from troubling to radioactive. Civil rights groups demanded transparency. The mayor's office began receiving hundreds of calls. Veterans organizations rallied around Denise, furious that a decorated black military officer had been mauled in a shopping center parking lot and then blamed for it. Retired judges, former prosecutors, and police reform advocates appeared on television, breaking down the footage frame by frame. Even former K9 handlers criticized Mercer publicly, saying the deployment violated common sense before it ever violated policy. The official investigation moved unusually fast because the evidence was overwhelming. In just under 6 weeks, the department released preliminary findings. Officer Mercer had violated use of force policy, K9 deployment policy, detention procedure, de-escalation requirements, truthfulness expectations in incident reporting, and professional conduct standards. The report also found that he had omitted key facts from his initial written statement and exaggerated Denise's behavior in ways not supported by any video evidence. Officer Moreno, by contrast, was commended internally for intervening to prioritize medical care and for accurately documenting her observations. Mercer was fired before the end of the second month. His union attempted to challenge the termination, arguing that he acted under tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving circumstances. But that argument collapsed under scrutiny because the uncertainty had been created by Mercer himself. Denise had not made the scene tense. Mercer had. Denise had not created confusion. Mercer had. A shopping center parking lot full of civilians is not a battlefield, and a woman asking why she is being detained is not a justification for a dog attack. Then came the civil lawsuit, and that was where the city truly began to understand the financial cost of failing to deal with Mercer earlier. Denise's attorneys uncovered prior complaints, not all of them formally sustained, but enough to establish a pattern. Traffic stops that escalated for no obvious reason. Citizens described as combative on paper, even when video suggested otherwise. Minor incidents involving disrespect turning into aggressive physical control tactics. The city realized it was not just defending one terrible night, it was defending years of tolerated behavior. When the case reached mediation, the numbers being discussed stunned the public. Denise's legal team argued not only physical injury and emotional distress, but violation of civil rights, reputational harm, long-term nerve damage in her dominant arm, and punitive institutional failure. They brought in experts on policing, K9 deployment, trauma, and command responsibility. They showed how Denise's military background made her response especially credible. She was trained to remain calm under threat. If someone like her was described as dangerous in that footage, then the problem was not her behavior. The problem was the lens through which Mercer saw her. In the end, the department and the city agreed to a settlement worth $8.4 million. That figure included damages, medical costs, ongoing treatment, and a separate fund to support oversight reforms and community review initiatives. The amount made national headlines. Commentators called it one of the most embarrassing payouts in the department's fictional history. City leaders called it painful but necessary. Community members called it overdue accountability. The footage, once released in full, exploded online. Millions watched the moment Mercer barked orders he couldn't justify. Millions watched Denise stand firm without ever becoming disorderly. Millions watched the dog attack. And millions watched Officer Moreno say the words that confirmed what viewers already knew. She was not charging you. Law schools, criminal justice programs, and police academies use the fictional case in ethics discussions and force review workshops. Veterans groups cited Denise's response as a model of composure under unlawful authority. Civil liberties advocates said the video showed exactly why knowledge matters, because Denise's refusal to surrender her dignity never gave Mercer legal justification, even if he tried desperately to manufacture it. Public reaction, of course, was divided in the way it often is when truth becomes inconvenient. Some people praised Denise for courage, discipline, and refusing to be erased by fear. Others said she should have complied first and complained later. But that criticism fell apart under the weight of the footage. Comply with what, exactly? With a shifting set of commands unsupported by a clear legal basis? With being handcuffed beside her own car because an officer could not tolerate a question? That mindset reveals the core problem. It assumes that rights exist only on paper, and that ordinary people must surrender them whenever authority demands it, no matter how irrational the demand may be. The department, under enormous pressure, announced several reforms after the settlement. K-9 deployment rules were tightened. Supervisory approval became mandatory for certain field uses. Officers were retrained on investigative detention, articulation of legal basis, and duty to de-escalate. Body camera review protocols were expanded. Civilian complaint patterns received earlier intervention review. Bias recognition training, previously treated as a checkbox exercise, became mandatory scenario-based instruction. In short, the department had to start teaching its officers the very thing Denise demonstrated naturally that night. Calm authority is not the same as coercion, and lawful power has limits. After the case went public, additional residents came forward with stories about Mercer. Not all involved force. Some involved contempt, humiliation, selective aggression, and a pattern of treating black residents as instantly suspicious while extending patience to others. None of those stories alone might have changed anything. Together, after Denise's case, they painted a clear portrait. This had never been one isolated mistake. It was a pattern tolerated until a camera, a witness, and a uniquely prepared victim made denial impossible. As for Denise Holloway, she did not disappear after the settlement. She underwent surgeries, physical therapy, and months of recovery, but she also became something else, a national voice in fictional advocacy circles for accountability, veterans' rights, and dignified civilian police interaction. She spoke at universities, law forums, and leadership conferences about trauma, discipline, and the danger of confusing obedience with public safety. She often said the same thing in interviews. The most dangerous person in a uniform is not the one with the least power. It is the one with power and no self-control. She used part of her settlement to fund legal aid scholarships for veterans and community defense education workshops. Even after what happened, she chose to build something from the wreckage. Officer Daniel Mercer, on the other hand, became a warning. His law enforcement career was over. No neighboring department would touch him. His name became associated not with toughness or proactive policing, but with ego, bias, and catastrophic misuse of force. The very authority he tried to display in that parking lot dissolved under scrutiny because it had never been rooted in professionalism. It had been rooted in intimidation. So what is the bigger lesson here? It is not just that one officer acted horribly. It is that systems often fail long before the worst moment becomes visible. They fail when warning signs are ignored. They fail when arrogance is mistaken for confidence. They fail when communities are told to trust processes that only move after undeniable public embarrassment. This story is about race, yes. It is about power, absolutely. But it is also about knowledge. Because the reason Denise was able to fight back effectively after the attack was not physical force. It was clarity. She knew how to observe, how to document, how to remain controlled, how to turn facts into accountability. A lot of people online said they were amazed by how calm she remained. But that calm was not luck. It was discipline. It was years of training, years of command, years of understanding that in a dangerous situation, your mind can become your strongest defense. She did not win because the system worked automatically. She won because she forced the system to confront evidence it could not explain away. And yes, there is a harder truth here too. Not everyone in Denise's position would survive long enough, stay calm enough, or have enough support to produce that outcome. That is exactly why this story matters. Justice should not depend on whether a victim is exceptionally trained, unusually composed, or lucky enough to be filmed from 6 different angles. Rights should not require perfection from the person being violated. If there is one thing people should take from this story, it is this. First, authority should always be accountable to law. Second, calm questioning is not aggression. Third, documentation matters more than most people realize. Fourth, patterns of misconduct must be taken seriously before they become tragedies. And fifth, knowledge changes power. The moment someone understands their rights, understands procedure, and understands how abuse actually works, intimidation starts losing its grip. One parking lot, one officer, one dog, a matter of minutes, and everything changed. A department's image collapsed. A city paid millions. A career ended. A woman who was supposed to be broken became a symbol of disciplined resistance. That is the power of evidence. That is the importance of self-possession. That is what happens when someone with authority meets someone who refuses to surrender truth just because a badge is demanding it. So here is the final question. If you were standing in Denise Holloway's place that night, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have stayed calm? Would you have documented? Would you have pushed back? Because stories like this are not really about one parking lot or one officer. They are about every moment where power assumes it will go unchallenged. They are about every person who has been told to submit first and hope fairness comes later. And they are about the rare but unforgettable times when someone says no, stands on principle, and forces the whole world to look. Denise Holloway's legacy was never just the settlement. It was never just the firing. It was never just the headlines. Her legacy was showing millions of people that dignity under pressure is a form of strength, that knowledge can become a shield, and that even in systems built to protect themselves, truth can still break through. This is the story of how a racist officer released a K-9 on a 55-year-old black female military officer in a parking lot and lost everything. But more than that, it is a story about what happens when discipline confronts prejudice, when evidence confronts power, and when one person refuses to let injustice write the final report. And if this story made you think, remember this. Not every fight looks like shouting. Not every act of courage looks dramatic in the moment. Sometimes courage is staying calm while someone else loses control. Sometimes courage is remembering every detail. Sometimes courage is surviving the night and coming back with the truth.